We also specialize in Azure features, such as virtual machines, the web application side of it, a lot of the automation side of it as well. Prior to starting Sky North, I was actually at Microsoft on the Fargo campus for 9 years. I did a bunch of different roles, primarily in SharePoint. So if you guys, I see some familiar names on the call here. So stem back to the SharePoint Saturday days. I think I've been doing these type of events now for probably pretty close to 10 years. So love doing it, love speaking, and we're just here to help everybody out and provide our knowledge, what we kind of learn on the road here. Along with me, I have Leif Olson. So Leif, you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Leif Olson, Sky North Software. Similar story to Scott. I came from Microsoft, 10 years at Microsoft, through different escalation roles into SharePoint, and then moved into a premier field engineer, focus on more Office 365 and Azure for different customers.
Perfect. And just a quick confirmation from anybody, the slides are moving through on your screens? Okay, perfect. Okay, just one quick heads up. The last user group session or admin day back in April of 2021, we did a very a similar session to this. It's out on YouTube because the team does a great job at posting everything on YouTube, so go visit their channel. But it's called Automating Repeatable Teams. For that session, we had some feedback that we did a little bit too much SharePoint in it, and people wanted to really see the team side of it. And so we expanded on that. We're going a little deeper in the team side. Also, there was some feedback that they wanted kind of more hand-holding, more walkthroughs on how to get there, because some of this stuff is pretty complicated. So I would urge everybody to go out to the YouTube channel, take a look at our video just from about 6 months ago, if you need to get started on that. And then this video will be posted as well.
Yeah, and to expand on kind of the last session we did, we used the PnP to provision the SharePoint components, and then we just ran PowerShell to convert that into a team site. So we're doing a little different on this time.
Yep, exactly. So expectations for about the next hour here, hour and a half. This is going to be 200 to 300 level content. So we are going to be doing a little bit of development, a little bit of code inside of Azure automation, as well as just the PnP templates, which deal with XML. We're going to be talking about what is PnP. If you guys need that 5,000 foot overview and to get you up to speed, we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to go into why use automation, right? So why are we doing this presentation? What do we see out there in the field? What exactly are our other customers doing in this realm? And then we're going to dive into really building out that solution, right? So that involves really 3 steps. One is discovering the need, because without a need, you guys probably wouldn't be here. There's probably some talks in the office on how do we make teams more accessible. Along with that, we're going to be talking about architecting the solution, right? Everybody's in different business sectors here. We know that, a company that does road construction is a lot different than a company that does healthcare. There might be some fundamental similarities there. So hopefully this touches on a little bit of everything. And then we're going to go into creating the solution. So most of this presentation is really going to be us walking you through step-by-step how to do it. There is a lot of different steps involved. There's a lot of different Microsoft technologies involved. So questions are absolutely welcome here. Feel free to come off of mute if you guys have a question, or type in the chat window. Since we're both speaking, we'll be able to field those questions. And then, of course, we'll be doing live demos throughout this whole event. Okay, so getting started, what is PnP? Okay, so for starters, PnP stands for patterns and practices, meaning best practices type thing. It's basically a PowerShell module that was developed for cross-platform use, and it contains over 500 commandlets that work with Microsoft 365 environments. So some specific use cases, SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, Planner, and even Flow all support the patterns and practices PowerShell module.
Yeah. And to kind of add on that, PnP is really a community, based on Microsoft engineers, partners, people at different companies that come together, and they're trying to make tools available that makes job easier in Office 365. So PnP just isn't PowerShell. There's PnP SharePoint Framework. There's PnP.NET libraries. There's a whole range of different PnP things, and I put the link in there. So feel free to hit the PnP site, go look at it, go through the different samples and solutions, and kind of walk through the different items in there.
Yep, absolutely. And so that's the 5,000 foot overview. So kind of honing it down a little bit, where do we use PnP? So the short answer there is in PowerShell, of course. It's a PowerShell module, but you can use it on your desktop, right? If you're running Windows 10 and you have PowerShell installed, you can download those modules by just doing the command here on the screen, install -module -name pnp.powershell. Where we're going to be using it today is in the Azure automation side. So if you see the screenshot, that's basically the module that we attach into our automation runbook. So everything's living in the cloud. So it basically pulls down this package from the repository online and installs it so we can use it just as if we were running it locally on the machine.
Just to add to, just supporting Office 365 and SharePoint in general, I barely have a need to use the SharePoint PowerShell or Teams PowerShell modules. I usually try to do everything in PnP, especially how everything's kind of interconnected. It's nice to have one module if I need to create a SharePoint site, then do group stuff, and then do team stuff, all in that same process.
Yep, great point, Leif. Okay, so on to why automate. Okay, so everything under this track is about automation. And so just a quick few bullet points here on why we choose to automate. So really the number one thing is to make things easy for your IT staff, for your employees. Basically a set it and forget it type scenario where you create it once, you can reuse it multiple times. Really what that does in effect is saves the company money, right? You don't have someone having to process through different Teams requests, different functionalities. You give them a baked solution and they can go put it in the oven as many times as they want. Another reason why you want to choose automation is basically to give people that familiar configuration across departments, across virtual teams, across the globe. Basically, you can package this stuff up into a reusable object so that everybody is getting the same things no matter how many times you do it. Now, if you're like me in life, you come from the SharePoint world, right? Everybody knows that you have 100 different SharePoints out there, 100 different SharePoint sites. They're all going to look different. They're all going to have a different color format. They're all going to be different lists and libraries, right? That was kind of the wild, wild west back in the day. All these automation capabilities really help kind of containerize that. Also, it empowers the users to create teams as the business needs. I don't know how many of you on the call are still a little gun shy about opening up who can create teams, but there's an easy way to disable so people can't create them through a PowerShell line. But this is allowing people to create it. This is empowering them to do it, and you guys know that all of the settings are correct. Okay, and so speaking of the settings, there's always a desire to have those settings correct for every single team. So things like hiding the email address in the GAL, that's a very popular one. Making all of the teams public or private, depending on how your business works. Disabling or enabling private channels. Again, that's kind of a sticky subject with how people are creating their teams. Default naming conventions, which there are some built-in tools to do that. We're going to do that all through the app dev side. And then capture the type of data that is important to your business. So who's using these teams? What departments are using them? If you have a bill back model internally, maybe you have to bill the HR team a little bit more for using Teams because they're taking up more storage. Again, all businesses are different. That's just some things we see. And so all of these settings that we just mentioned, these are all configurable throughout the templates we're going to be building. So if you've decided that everybody that creates a team, the team should be hidden from the GAL, the email address, we can take care of that. We do one setting in the script or the template, and every team from then on out is going to be set that way. Okay, on to discovering a need. So this is really figuring out how your business is going to benefit the most from this automation, right? There has to be a need. There has to be something that says, we have too many people wanting teams. We have data sprawl all over too many different locations. Whatever your story is on getting this automated, you have to discover it. Okay, and so just a couple examples to think about. If your business is heavy into projects, right? Projects meaning temporary projects, or they're doing projects for customers or consultants, things like that. They use the same repeatable business processes all the time. And what I mean by that is, think of a road construction company, right? For every road construction project, you're going to have legal documents. You're going to have subcontractor documents. You might take photos of the project you're doing construction on. You're going to have expenses to log, and then you're going to need a spot to do collaborative chats, right? That is one need for your business, because that is something that your business thrives on, is those different road construction projects. Another example is a department site. Okay, so if you think of your department, being IT or HR or finance, you might operate slightly different than someone on a project team that's doing construction work, right? You're going to be thinking about, how do we get information out to our employees? How do we do our how-to documents? How do we publish year-end benefits or keep track of where the year-end benefits are at? Financial statements for the finance team. And then similarly, all of these departments probably want to know who's on their team, when they're going to be out of office, when the next company party is at, so they can go and celebrate. And then lastly, the team directory, right? So if you have all of these different teams that you need to know who's on it and how to get a hold of somebody, we can create these two templatized different sites, project and department sites, and push them out for all of your different departments, HR, IT, finance, so they're all dealing with the same thing and they don't have any sprawl. So after you've discovered that need, it comes time to really architecting the solution. A couple things to keep in mind with architecting the solution. Again, each business is going to be different. If you're a road construction company, you might have a completely different project than an internal sales team trying to sell some online product, right? Each solution is also going to be different. So what one department might use for a workflow or a team calendar might not work for somebody else. So you really got to decide how you're going to build and package these solutions before you go to designing them, or creating them, that is. Also, another thing to keep in mind when you're architecting the solution, there's tons of Microsoft technologies out there to use. You got to choose what's best for you. Choose what's the cheapest is my best advice I can give you. Okay, so just to give you a comparison, we have Azure Functions on the one side. You could use that as an option for pushing through the automation. You also have Power Automate, which is built on top of Azure Functions. Okay, so maybe there's some give and take on what you decide there. It all depends on what that solution looks like.
You could do a scheduled task on a server. Not recommended, right? But if it's available and you don't have the Azure components, it's definitely an option.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So the next bullet point is HTTP webhooks versus automation steps. To add to that, just like Leif said, maybe this is a scheduled task on a server, because a server can use this PnP PowerShell just like Azure can. So if you guys are comfortable with scheduled tasks, that might be a way. Also, we're going to be submitting the forms, these request forms for teams, using Power Apps. Maybe you don't even want to get Power Apps in the pictures. Maybe you just do that directly in a SharePoint form. Maybe you use Microsoft Forms for that, right? There's all kinds of different areas, and we didn't pick anything in particular. It's just what we most commonly use for this demonstration. But what we will be using is Azure Automation. That's going to be actually building out the team and processing the template. We use Power Automate, and all that is going to be doing is picking up a request from SharePoint Online and pushing it to Azure Automation. We're using Power Apps to submit that request, and then we're using SharePoint Online for tracking. Again, you guys can use your discretion here, whatever's comfortable with you, whatever you guys are familiar with. In the most basic form of what we're going to be doing, you would even just need like a scheduled task with some type of parameter to push to it. So you can make this very simple. Okay, a couple more slides before we get into the fun stuff. So after you've architected that solution, you have in your mind what it's going to be, what it's going to do, who it's going to service. You then need to define the process. And for us, the process is going to be this. The user goes to a Teams request app using Power Apps. They're going to submit an item that they need a new Teams team, a new team in Teams to get processed. After that, that item is going to get submitted to a SharePoint list. And then once the item is submitted in the SharePoint list, it's going to go to Power Automate. Power Automate is then going to take that data that's entered into the list, and it's going to create an automation job in Azure Automation. And then as Azure Automation is provisioning it, it's going to look back at SharePoint for this template file that we've created so that it knows what type of team template we're doing. So that's kind of the logical thought process on what we're going to be building out here. Again, we picked a SharePoint list because we wanted the ability to go track these requests and see maybe what department is being used, and anything can be discretionary here. Now, okay, breaking this down into how we build this. There's really 9 steps that we're going to be walking you through. And starting with the SharePoint list is just create a SharePoint list to store the request information. Number 2 is to create a Power App to submit the request to SharePoint. Number 3 is to create the Azure Automation account. Number 4 is going to be add a PNP module into the automation account, and then delegate permissions, and then create a runbook, configure a couple parameters, create a webhook, and all that's done on the Azure side. And then step 9 is we're going to create the flow that actually goes through and processes all the data from the SharePoint list. So let's get into it. I'm going to go ahead and change my screen here. So give me 1 second. Okay, I'm going to be sharing Google Chrome. Can everybody see me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So again, creating a SharePoint list. Hopefully everybody knows how to do this. If not, it's very, very easy. We can just come in here, and actually let me do it in classic mode. I'm old school. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a custom list. Right here. You can give this whatever name you want it. I could call it M365 Teams Request Tracker. Okay, I'm going to go into this list, and we're going to give it the fields that we want. Again, discretionary. What all do you want to capture? So, you know, most of the time people want to be able to have their users input a team name. So I'm going to create a single line of text called team name. You have to decide what type of templates do you want to present to these users. Maybe it's a single template. Maybe it's multiple. For the demonstration later, when Leif jumps in, we actually have 3 templates built out. So for here, I'm just going to create a couple, a standard template, and how about we just call it project, and a department template. Okay, and then what we're going to do is create a person or group column. We'll call this team owners. And we want more than 1 owners available. Again, discretionary, but we're going to say allow multiple selections here because we want to have multiple owners. I always preach the best practice. And then we also want to empower the user to add the members. So we're going to add team members here too. And enable multiple selections for members. Okay, this is as basic as you need this at this point. You have a name, you have the template, and you have who's going to be added to the team. Now, if you want to go through other tracking items, like we've had customers do, maybe selecting what department that users are coming from, so HR, finance, or IT. You could select maybe a cost center, maybe a business unit, whatever your business has. Now is the time to do it. The only thing to think about is that what we're showing you today is going to be designed for end users. So you're going to want to keep it somewhat simple so end users don't get overwhelmed or have something they may not know. Okay, but at this point, you would go out and customize your entire form. Really, what comes next then is now that we have this baseline SharePoint list, we are going to hop over to Power Apps. And hold on one second. I have to unpin my bar at the top. Okay, we're going to hop over to Power Apps and we're going to create a new Canvas app, and this is going to be called our Teams. We'll call it M365 Teams Request App. This is going to be built for tablet. And again, keeping this super, super simple. All we really need to do is connect to that SharePoint list. And oh, I must have not clicked add data. Give me 1 second here. There we go. There we go. So here's my M365 Teams request tracker list connecting up to Power Apps. A couple little quirks here that we got to do. Change it to a new form. We're connecting up to the list. I'm going to remove the attachments field because I forgot to do that earlier. And I'm going to make it just a single column form. I want this super basic. Okay. We've done these in the past with a fancy tabular view. If you guys want to capture a lot of properties or make this really visual, again, this is just for showing you a really basic way of doing it. We're going to add a submit button in the corner with a function of submit form. This is what actually submits it to the SharePoint list right here. And then we'll do a new screen. I'll just do a success screen so we have somewhere to know that we're good. And what I'm doing here is changing the navigation on the success screen just to go back to the home page. I'm going to reset the form. And on the property of this form, it is going to be the on success property, meaning once the form is successfully submitted to SharePoint, then we are going to navigate to our success screen, which is called screen 2. Okay, so extremely, extremely simple form at this point. This is going to be our entire SharePoint request app. And so if I just want to play this, new Teams request is my title. Team name is going to be live demo team name. My template I'm going to choose is standard. My owners are going to be Megan and Grady. And then we're going to go ahead and submit this item. Now, at this point, this Power Apps is not connected to anything except for a SharePoint list. Okay, so it looks like it was successful. I go back to my main menu, and there we're done with it. Now, if I go to my SharePoint list, we can see that that item was successfully submitted. So far, we haven't done anything on the Teams automation side of it. This is just kind of building the plumbing. Okay, so what's next after this? And actually, again, just to reiterate, I did it through a Power App. You don't have to do it through a Power App. You can use a SharePoint form. If you want to keep things simple, keep Power Apps out of it. We found a lot of people like using Power Apps just because of the ability to be able to embed that into a team as well. Okay.
And I would say, once, it always can start out simple, right? And when you build a Power Apps, you have flexibility to add more kind of checks and pull different data into it and make different validation on those items. So a lot of times when we work with customers, we know it might be a simple app right away, but at the end, it might not be so simple.
Yep, great point, Leif. Okay, I'm going to switch screens now over to my Azure automation side. We're going to keep going with the plumbing there. So once this comes through, I will go and get started. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with Azure automation, it is one of the technologies built on the Azure stack. It is a free service, but hold on. It's a free service for very low amounts of automation runbooks. Microsoft won't bill you. If you hit a certain threshold, they charge you per run of this runbook, but you will need a credit card based subscription to be able to bill this because it is a billable service. Okay. And so how you get there is if I just go up to the top search bar and I search for automation accounts, it will bring us to this screen here. Now we have one built out for the demo later, but let's just build one together. Okay, so it's going to, again, ask you what subscription do you want to associate this with, because it is billable after you go over a certain amount. So just keep that in mind. Also, just something to call out with this. It's not much. If you guys ever are going to hit charges, I mean, we're talking, Leif, what is it, $10, $15 a month that you've seen before? So it's not an expensive service at all.
Yeah, it's per minute. I think you get like, I'll check here, but I thought, so you get 500 minutes free, and then it's 0.002 dollars per minute.
Okay.
So.
Yep. So it's not much, but just keep that in mind. You want to make sure the controls are in place so you guys don't go over this or something would happen where it explodes it. But I'm going to give it a title. The automation account is going to be called Live Demo Automation Account. We're going to put it in Central US. Okay. I don't need any tags or anything else. I'm going to go ahead and create this.
And one thing Scott kind of skipped over there. When we start talking about permissions, we're doing cross-tenant type permissions. So we're using like a certificate and a client ID to make that jump across tenants. A lot of our government customers have to do that as GCC uses Azure Public. If we were doing this in one main tenant, we kind of recommend using like the managed identity piece of Azure Automation. And what that is ties identity to Azure Automation, so we don't have to worry about any credentials or keys or anything being leaked. So a lot of times when we're talking security and how we can secure this with the customer, their security team is a huge fan of when we bring up, okay, we need these elevated permissions, right? We need to be able to create teams, read write on all groups. So there's high level permissions that we need, and if we use a managed identity, it's locked into just this environment or to this Azure Automation. So usually we get the kind of the green check before having to break through the different security pieces when we use managed identity.
Yep, great point, Leif. And for those, I'll give everybody a visual here for those that weren't maybe following. But underneath, or after we've created that automation account, it's technically registered as an app in your Azure tenant. Okay. 1 second. Okay. It's technically created under the covers as an app in your Azure tenant. So we have the client ID, the client secret, those different parameters to connect into it. Like Leif said, what we're doing in this demonstration is using a certificate, it's using a client ID, and it's using an app ID to basically connect. The reason that we're doing that in this demonstration is because our Azure environment is isolated from our M365 environment. We used a Microsoft demo tenant for one, and we used our actual Azure demo tenant for another. So that's the reason we chose to do it. Again, all about architecting that solution and what works for you guys. We would do it other ways if this was an all-in-one environment. But underneath this, basically, this app now is living in here as an automation account. You have to go and give it permissions. Okay, so this underneath your Azure Active Directory, Enterprise Applications, and the app that is named the automation account, we will come in here and assign permissions to that account. Actually, I told you the wrong one, so let me go back. It's under Azure Active Directory, and then it's under App Registrations.
It should be. I think the search is.
Search might be broken. Let me go back and toggle it here.
Remove the application starts with.
Oh, is it search broken here? Well, this is a live demo. So what I'm going to do here is just pick our previous automation account and show you. It should show up here. Something with my browser is not working. But anyway, you would come into the application and you would assign it the API permissions needed to do whatever you're doing. Okay, so for things that we're doing a lot of this through the PNP module, uses graph for a lot of the stuff. So you might need to come in here and assign different graph permissions to that module, to this application, I mean. And so let's just look at groups here. Okay, so there are different permissions, group read write, group read write all, group create. So these are the permissions that you're going to need in order to actually create groups behind the scenes using this application. The other thing to call out here is, if you remember I mentioned before, if you guys are locking down who can create teams in your environment, which we highly recommend actually, this is used, since it's using an app, there is no user context by it. So it has permissions to create that. And all your users would need would be permissions to the Power App to be able to submit to it. Okay, so you would add permissions here. You would grant admin consent to make sure everything is good for all of the users. Okay, and then moving on, this would be the permission side of the application. And so back to our Azure Automation account, we're going to go into the Azure Automation account and we're going to make our lives really easy by setting up some parameters or variables, I guess. Okay, and the variables are going to be maybe the client ID. Value. Okay, the value would be, let me go back and grab it 1 second. That's right. We were using this one. Okay, so you grab the application ID, we paste it in there. This really doesn't like me today. Okay, let me try this again. Client ID. I'll use there. There's my create button. Okay, we would also maybe add our tenant ID into the mix. So let me go get my tenant ID. Okay, and create that. And maybe you would add a certificate. Maybe you'd add other things that you want to hard code into your scripts. That's all totally doable. We're going to be using this later. Okay, so we can go ahead and define our variables and get those built out. And basically the nuts and the bolts, the pieces that run the Azure automation job are what's called a run book. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the Azure automation account. We're going to go into the run books and we're going to create a new run book. There's a couple in here by default. These are just test scripts that you can delete. But when we go in here and create the run book, we could call this Teams Request Run Book. It's going to be a PowerShell run book type, and we're going to go ahead and create that. And this is where we would enter in all of our PowerShell code. So whatever we want to do here, if it's create a Teams or if it's create a planner or if it's even just create a SharePoint site, we would get all of that developed and pasted in here. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a previous one. Give me 1 second. Okay, this is the one we're going to be using for the demonstration here. So everything in here, I'm just going to copy it paste it in our run book, and then I'm going to go ahead and save. Save will save this down. Publish it actually publishes this endpoint to the internet, so it'll be an active endpoint for us to use, or an active automation job for us to use. Okay, now with that in there, we have to also connect, have something be able to send into it, and that's where the webhook comes in. So the webhook is what basically opens up a web endpoint for us to send the details over to this Azure job. So we'll call this live demo webhook. You want to copy out this string, because once this string goes away, it's gone. You have to create a new endpoint. There's a token built in this string. And then for parameters, this is basically what objects will we send over, or what objects will we receive on this webhook. So I'm just going to do webhook data to get something in there, and we'll create it. Okay, so I know we just went through a lot, so let me just do a quick recap on what we did. Okay, we just created an Azure automation account. Inside of this automation account, we created a run book. This is where the actual code, the development stuff happens for what we're going to be doing. How we trigger this run book is through an Azure automation webhook. So what we did lastly is we created the webhook. And the webhook is what gives us the live web URL endpoint that's always listening and waiting for information to come get sent over. Once we have all of this built, the other thing that we did is we added permissions inside of app registrations for that automation account under API permissions. This is what tells this application it has granted permissions to it. So just any questions in the chat? Anybody want to come off of mute and does need any explaining yet, or are we still good to go? Okay, if anybody has any questions or needs me to recover anything, just absolutely let us know. Just type it up in chat. Otherwise, we'll keep going. Okay, so the plumbing is here at this point. So let me just kind of go back to the PowerPoint presentation. And let me get to the demo slide. So we created the SharePoint tracking list. We created the Power Apps request form. We created the Azure automation account. We delegated permissions. We created a run book. We added the parameters to the run book. And then we created a webhook that accepts the incoming traffic. Now what we have to do is develop that solution. We have all of the plumbing here. And there's two components to this. One is the actual code inside of the run book, and the other is the template for which Microsoft Teams is going to be building their team off of. So Leif, do you want to go over the run book code here?
Yeah, I can go through it. So part of it again is we're, and I don't know if Scott, you kind of mentioned the flow piece, but when that new item gets created into that SharePoint list, Power Automate will take that information and hit that webhook. When we get that automation, we kind of break it down. So we're gonna pull some variables out, and this is the authentication piece we talked about across tenant, and we'll show that setup and what permissions we did in a minute. But we get that connection string. We start breaking down the data that's passed through the webhook. It won't show you what it looks like. It's really just JSON data that's passed through the webhook. So we're kind of breaking that apart. We're getting the team name, the alias. We're removing any spaces from the alias. We're giving it a description, splitting the kind of the owners and the members so we can pass that into the template. Then we connect to a SharePoint site. So we put all our different templates into a document library in SharePoint. And the reason why we like to do that is we don't have to change anything with our automation code. Well, if we wanted to add a new template, we would just create that template name, put in that directory, update SharePoint, and it should show up in that Power App as a dropdown. once we get that template XML, we pass some variables. We overwrite the username with the owner name that we got from the web data, and then there's still some different issues. There's some bugs out there with how the PNP handles with app-only permissions. So to kind of get around that, we pre-create the Microsoft 365 group, and then we invoke our PNP template. And we'll kind of go through the 3 different standards. So we have a standard template that really is just a basic Teams that doesn't do anything other than kind of your generic team site. Then we have the standard or the department, which we kind of do different channels, and then we have a project that actually creates folder structures in SharePoint. Let me see. I can just go through the templates if that makes sense. Let me share my screen, Scott. So if we were looking at kind of the document library, if we look at documents, I have a folder just called templates. Again, we should be able to drop any of these. If we wanted to add a new template, it's just XML, we upload it, it'll be available in our provisioning process. So if we kind of go into the standard, this is really just kind of generic settings. We're creating a team, right? We're passing those parameters into the team that we got from the PowerShell, and then we're setting settings, right? So guest settings, are we going to allow to create updated channels? False. Allow delete channels? False for guests. We have different member settings. We have different message settings, right? Can an owner delete a message? Yes, true. So we can set all these standards. So even though we're not doing anything special with the channels and the content, we still can force a base level of settings that we might not do through just the normal, create teams. And one thing, a lot of, even if you're not doing templating, a lot of customers, when they start out, they want to control who can create teams. We don't want 40 teams that say my team or, everyone's team and different naming conflicts. So this helps kind of grow and put governance around the creation of teams, where you could add at a later part when you get your users used to it and used to the functionality and how the governance of teams, we could maybe release that for everyone and they can create their own teams. And then we're setting the owner that we're passing through, and we're setting different members. We just commented this out. We actually do add the members through the PowerShell script. It's more stable that way. And then really for this, we're just removing the wiki. We don't want the wiki to show up by default on the general tab. And then we can add a different OneNote. So this is really a generic template. So let me go back and go through the others here. Same one. So our next up would be department. So really what we do different in department is we're controlling kind of the channels and tabs. So we have a general channel. What we add is a tab called Employee Handbook, and I hard-coded a link to that file. The reason I did that is we're not doing any SharePoint provisioning on this one, and I'll show you that in the project one where we could actually create folders and you could upload files and different stuff on there and link it. But this, we're just creating a tab called an Employee Handbook. We're creating another channel called Documentation. Under that Documentation tab, we're removing the wiki. Again, we want to use OneNote instead. So we remove the wiki, we add OneNote in here. We create, and so there's a couple limitations here too. And then we create a task channel, and then we create a planner. So when we actually go ahead in this provisions, the Graph API doesn't support configuration yet for these type of items. So what it does is it places the component on the page where a user could click, and then it could configure and create those items. So we're really hoping that comes out where we can do full configuration of Planner and deploy different tasks and buckets and add it. There's some workarounds we could do to really do that in SharePoint and share a page, but it gets a lot of work. So we're really hoping that the configuration pieces come, and we'll show you this, but it still gives the user ability to, okay, we're going to use OneNote. Let me just click 2 clicks and that OneNote is set up and it's already mapped as a tab. Or if we're going to create tasks, we could create that planner, and then that planner would just be available as a dropdown. And there's different messaging options that we could paste in the channel for different items. For communication, if you want to give the channel a description of what it does. So the project XML is a little different. So with this, we're actually doing a PnP provisioning sequence. So we want to create the SharePoint site, create a document library, add folder structure, then create the team. So we have a sequence and a template set up. So if you look at our presentation from last time when we actually did just a SharePoint PnP provisioning, and we brought over multiple pages, we passed different web part values, and we create different project pages. You could technically do that in here, and then instead of running PowerShell to PnP to kind of teamify, we can do it just as a template. So if we look here, here's our template, and I'm creating a group. So I'm creating a SharePoint site with group. The group's already created from the PowerShell just to help with the app-only permissions. If you look at the content of this, it's a list. So really what I'm doing here is I'm creating a new list, or actually a library called project documents, and then I'm passing folder structure into that. So this is the SharePoint template. And then we call the sequence. So the sequence is, okay, we're going to create the sequence. This is going to be the variables again that we're passing through PowerShell, the team name, the team alias, and then our PnP templates, we're going to provision the SharePoint items. So after that sequence kicks off, we then apply the PnP structure. So if you look at the group, we're saying, okay, we're going to apply a PnP template now. We already have, we're going to use the ID that was created from the sequence, so we can get that group that we just created, pass it in here to the group ID. We're setting the display parameters. We're adding the different kind of just same features as before, user name for the owner, and on the security, we're creating channels. So on this channel, on the general channel, again, we're going to remove wiki. We're going to create project meeting notes tied to OneNote. We're going to create a channel called project management. Under that channel, of course, we're hiding the wiki again. We're calling a document library. So we're creating a project outline tab that is linked to that project documents. As you can see, we're passing the sequence site URL variable. So when this creates, that list that we just created will be mapped as a tab into the PnP section. We do PnP notes again for OneNote. We create a project task and scheduling channel, and we're adding DISM Planner tab on that. So then, Scott, do you want to kick off? You want to maybe show the Power App and kick off each one of these, and we can go through them?
Absolutely. Let me share my Chrome window again here. Okay. Give it a second for everybody to come off. And okay. So what we're going to be doing now is just creating those 3 different templates that Leif outlined here. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so for team name, we're going to call this one M365 Live Demo. And we'll call it standard for standard template. We're going to go ahead and add Megan as the owner. And we're going to go ahead and add Brady as a member. And then go ahead and submit that one. And let's just do this 3 times. M365 Live Demo This one will be a project site. This one is going to have Megan as the owner as well. And Grady.
Do you want to add the mod account so we can see them, the teams when we pull them up?
Yes. It will be late because the owner one is built in. Okay, and then let's do one more, and this is M365 Live Demo Department. And that's going to be our department template. Go ahead and add Megan and Grady again. And so what we've done is we've submitted 3 different teams requests. And so how this is getting processed now is if we go over to our flow, which all the flow is responsible for is taking the data from our SharePoint list. So here are the 3 new requests that I just did. The flow is just responsible for taking the data from your SharePoint list and sending it over to Azure Automation. So let's just give Flow 1 second to pick up on this. Okay, as you can see, Flow has the 3 new requests now. And so what this is doing inside of the Flow is it's basically waiting for that SharePoint item to be created. It's sending an email to the user saying, congratulations, your new Teams request is being processed. We're doing, of course, some initializing some variables inside of Flow to package the members and the owners. And then here's the big thing that we're doing. This is the HTTP web service call over to that URL. Now, if you see this URL, this is the same one that we created when we were doing the webhook. Okay, so that's what we're actually going to reference is that webhook URL. And then you can see inside of the body, it's just a JSON object that's formatted with our team name, the owners, the members, and then what template we used. Okay, so once it sends it over to the Azure Automation side, Azure Automation is going to pick it up. Let me just validate Azure Automation has picked it up. Okay, and it has. We have 2 out of the 3 completed. 1 is still building out. And so what that Azure Automation job is doing is it's actually creating these Teams channels for us. You can see these are actually being built out here using those template.xml files that Leif just went over. So as we'll let the screen sit here in a little bit and you'll see how it's building these out. And usually the standard one finishes first because there's nothing extra in it. But if you guys can see the standard one, this again it's a basic team. It has a general channel. That's it. It's maybe meant for your everyday team's purpose. Maybe someone wants a private team, something to do their day-to-day work in. That was really the purpose of a standard. This fits, maybe 90% of your everyday users type stuff. And then Leif, do you want to take over and share and go through this while it's building out?
Yeah, I can. I can get back. Okay, can you see? All right, so if we were talking about the different kind of items, so when we were talking about project, right, the main thing with the project site is we wanted to populate things in SharePoint. So we had to pre-create that SharePoint sequence. And really that was the project management piece. I have a tab here that outlines as a project outline. So these items are in a SharePoint document library. So if you had a folder structure you wanted to create for different projects, that's how we would do it. We would kind of use the multiple sequence part of the PnP template. So if you go into, right, each folder has different. So this was created. So every time a project gets created, we would have, go back here, we would have those folders available. Projects notes. So I kind of mentioned you know, even though that we set up the one node, it's not fully set up. The configuration piece of Graph API wasn't available yet. But what you would do is you would just click setup, fetching notebooks, and we could just use that default notebook, for example. If we were doing project tasks and scheduling, you know, we hide the wiki. We have the project task, which was connected to a planner. There we go, setup tab. And you could just create a new plan. And then you have planner as well. So the project, again, the main part of the project is it provisions a lot of those SharePoint components. If you really wanted to get crazy with it, you could create, think about the SharePoint provision, you could create pages, you could put employee directories, you could create all those different items and include it into that SharePoint template, pre-provision it, and then just add those as tabs within your teams. If we were looking at the department pieces, we should have more channels. Maybe I need a refresh here. But the department really just broke down the different channels. Nothing really much different than the kind of the project and then the standard. So really, again, it's to give you those multiple different templates. If you have multiple, you know, department sites, or you have, you know, project sites, or even the standard sites for different groups, it gives you the option where you can kind of tailor different things. Another piece I wanted to kind of mention, now that I'm in the tenant, we talked about the authentication, and we were actually doing cross-tenant. So this is actually the app registration in this M365 tenant. So again, our Azure automation job is in another tenant. How we make that communicate together is we use a certificate for the actual key part of it. And then if you go to the overview, what we grab is the client ID, and tenant. So with these, the tenant ID, client ID, and the certificate, when we do the connection piece in the PowerShell, we can say, hey, this is where I'm going. This is what I need access to. This is the criteria I have for this application. We have tons of permissions that we're doing. We really wanted to kind of open the door. And this is where, right, if you're doing different automation, where that managed identity is more secure when you're an all-in-one tenant, because we're kind of giving a lot of permissions to this application. Again, certificates better in a key, and then a managed identity is better than a certificate. Scott, do you want to maybe pull up the PowerShell one more time, and we can show where we're doing the variables and kind of just show that again?
Yep, absolutely. I don't think something went through. Let me click it again. Okay, there we go. So if I move forward to our slides, the runbook code, Leif, did you want to go over this?
Yeah, so I kind of showed you where we talked about the certificate, the client ID, and the tenant ID and the URL. So these are the variables that we've actually, so instead of putting them in our code, we created variables inside of Azure Automation. And then if you look down, when we do connect-PNP online, you have the different URL, client ID, and thumbprint options. So that's how we're making the connection to that other tenant to do different information. Colin, is there any limitations in GCC High? You know, so GCC High is going to use Azure Government. So, you know, there might be, I haven't tried the PNP provision in GCC High yet. I know we're not doing like any external sharing or anything like that, so you might be limited on some features per se, but it should work. I mean, we can definitely look at testing it, but
The one thing I know for sure, Leif, is that in our flow we use the HTTP webhook, and that's required in GCC environments, because the Azure, there's another Power Automate step just called create an Azure automation job that actually makes it much simpler, but we can't use that because that's not in the GCC tenant yet.
yeah,
So,
and GCC High might, I mean, because that GCC High is using Azure Gov, so you might not hit that issue with GCC High, but you do just with regular GCC, where there's no direct connection. You have your Office 365 GCC that lives on the Azure public. So we weren't able to use that automation step. We had to do a HTTP post.
Yep, and Colin, just to show you what I'm talking about, this is the HTTP post that posts to our automation webhook. There is actually a much simpler way of doing this, and that is by using Azure Automation. There's actually a create job, which is a premium connector. This could do it automatically. It signs in and connects to your tenant. The reason we didn't do this again, it was because we had cross-tenant. We had Azure in one location and Power Automate in the other. So we couldn't use this. But again, this kind of goes back to our very original point. There's probably a lot of things that we could do differently if there was something that you didn't like. Like, don't use a Power Apps form, use just a SharePoint form. Don't use an HTTP webhook, use this. Like Leif mentioned, all the certificate, all the identity stuff. There's so many different ways that you can do this. This by no means is the right way. This is just to get you started down that road.
Yeah, and even Microsoft talks about, if you think about moving away from Teams a little bit in SharePoint, right? SharePoint site designs allow you to trigger Power Automate and flows. And some of their recommended is they do logic apps, right? They put it to a queue and have logic apps trigger on that queue to process the PowerShell. We just use Azure Automation because that's what we do more than in logic apps. So there's pros and cons to each.
Yep. All right, so let me flip back to the PowerPoint one more time. We're just about wrapping up. So if anybody has any questions or would like to see another one of these steps, let us know. The PowerPoint does have, I'll get to these slides again. The PowerPoint does have the runbook code in it. So you guys will be provided that. This is pretty much as simple as we can get it for creating a connection into the PNP module. And you'll also be provided the standard Teams template that we created. This is probably about the most basic Teams template that you'd ever want. All there is that general channel, but then you can build off of that based on whatever your business needs are. So with that said, we're at the point for questions. So if anybody wants to come off of mute, if we need to help clarify anything, I know there's probably a lot here that you need to digest and a lot of stuff, but really the goal is that you guys can come back to this video, download the presentation, and get it done on your own as far as just a basic automation job. So does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, Connor, I think this is back to you for the drawing.
It sure is. Thanks, guys. That was excellent. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to have to explore that Azure stuff next week when I get some time. I can see that being very useful.
Yeah, Connor, just to give you some insight into the partner side, we are doing this all the time. After our presentation in April, everybody wants to have that standardized set of Teams anything, just because they hate the sprawl. So I think if everybody can get ahead of the curve, start learning about it now, you guys will be ready for that adoption side of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering if we can apply to other workloads too, you know, like mail objects and things like that. Anything that would require or a human doing it right now.
Yep, absolutely. That the automation account in Azure, I mean, with all of the modules, I just showed you the PNP module, but there is, I mean, thousands of other modules you can do and run off of that automation side of it. So
Yeah.
if it's Exchange that you guys manage, I would definitely, you know, recommend looking just down the Exchange module. Those are all be more familiar with you than a brand new PNP.
Yeah, this is awesome. Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Good, really good presentation. All right, I'm gonna spin my magical wheel here. All right, our winner is Tony Derricott. If I pronounced that right.
Beautiful.
Tony, if you could just send me your email address so we can send that info over to you, that'd be great.
Congrats, Tony. Thanks for staying to the end.